Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. I'm Raywin Guerrero, your host, and I'm the founder of WellWorks. And tonight I'm joined by Nathan Curran, our medical director, who's also a medical doctor, and Despina Giannapoulou, our clinical nutritionist. Fear has a huge impact on our immunity, and we're going to be talking a little bit today about the narrative of fear and how that's being perpetuated in the media currently, right?
Yeah.
So Nathan, if you want to maybe tell us a little bit about, about your sort of experience with, obviously you've been treating patients over the last couple of months while it wasn't yet a full-blown pandemic. And if you can tell us some of the signs and symptoms that we should be paying attention to and looking out for, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Right. As you rightly say, looking back, I think I've been seeing patients with symptoms that were highly suggestive of coronavirus infection, probably for longer than it's been recognized to be a problem in the UK. And I'm going back all the way to probably early February, if I think about that. So coronavirus has been doing the rounds globally and also within the UK from before the time that it's actually been made a priority in this country. In terms of symptoms that we've been seeing, well, the vast majority of people I've encountered have actually been healthy. And from my own experience, I've seen that, people who come, presenting in the early stages with concerns that they might be suffering from coronavirus are more anxious, and more scared and fearful as opposed to suffering from more severe signs of the illness itself. Now, as things have evolved in the UK, of course, if you have concerns about the fact you may have coronavirus, you shouldn't be going to your GP or your local health centre. You should actually be phoning the 111 helpline. But the numbers are quite clear, and we know that the vast majority of people who do contract coronavirus are going to be okay. In fact, the overwhelming proportion of people who contract coronavirus are going to either be asymptomatic, as in have absolutely no symptoms at all. And that's part of the problem, actually. The fact that, before we went into lockdown, people who had the disease were probably walking around spreading the disease without knowing that they were unwell. So on the lightest end of symptom severity would be people having no symptoms at all. And then the second group of people would probably have what we'd call probably mild to moderate cold or flu-like symptoms. Again, nothing debilitating, a symptom complex that we expect to pass over the course of 7 to 10 days for most people without incapacitating them. And then a very small, minute number of people, 5% or less, will actually end up contracting a more severe form of the disease. And I find that a lot of the fear narrative is being perpetuated by a disproportionate amount of reporting and focus on the numbers of people contracting severe disease. And I think one of the messages that we want to bring across tonight is that, the vast majority of people who contract this illness, if they do, will end up being okay. But even if you haven't contracted coronavirus yet, there's a lot that you can do. There are a lot of things that we'd like to share with you. You can put into your arsenal to ensure that if you do get coronavirus, the type of disease you will be getting will fall towards the milder end of the spectrum.
Fantastic. I feel like that's a really great place to begin. It definitely is in keeping with our ethos about, building a robust immune system and using the building blocks of diet, rest, exercise, stress management, and selective supplements as the tools in our toolkit against any sort of foreign invaders, not just coronavirus. And in fact, that brings me to a point about viruses in general. Why is this virus? Why is it so different to other viruses? Because I think in the past we have had viral outbreaks. We've had SARS. There was the Spanish flu. Tell us a little bit about that, Nathan, because I think that will hopefully allay some of the concerns that people have about this virus. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we live surrounded by and in harmony with viruses on a day-to-day basis. In fact, viruses, predate predate our arrival on this planet by quite a significant margin of time. So how coronavirus is different, it's a novel virus, i.e. it's a type of coronavirus that humans have never encountered before. Having said that, the fact that it's novel doesn't mean that we are not armed with sufficient immune resource, in the case of most people, to actually not become, to develop significant illness when exposed to the virus. So you rightly said, Ray, that this pandemic, even though it's unprecedented in terms of its scale and global reach, we have had, just in recent history, multiple pandemics which have come and gone. Just thinking back, you referred to the SARS pandemic in the early 2000s, and that was followed by another type of coronavirus pandemic in 2010, which was the MERS virus, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus. We also had swine flu, H1N1, around 2011, 2010. And then a decade later now, of course, we have the SARS virus. So pandemics aren't new. They at least every 10 years, 10 to 12 years, it's not unusual for 1 or 2 pandemics to actually do the rounds. How coronavirus is different, though, is because of its spreadability, because of the fact that it can cause illness in a big amount of people in a very short amount of time. And that small number of people that contract the more severe forms of the disease, if they all get ill at the same time, it has the capacity to overwhelm health services. So this is where coronavirus is different from those pandemics that have gone before. In fact, I read something very interesting the other day. The time that these viruses took, these previous pandemics took to infect about 1,000 people, for SARS, it was 130 days. For MERS, it was 2.5 years. And for coronavirus, it was 28 days. So the issue isn't really severity, it's spreadability. And this is why coronavirus is different from the pandemics that we've been confronted by in the past.
That's fascinating. I think the other thing that I feel like we probably need to touch on as well, you were talking the fatalities and things. I think with SARS, approximately 8,000 cases with fatality. So it had like a fatality rate of up to, I think, 10%. With
SARS, yeah, that's right. 10% fatality rate with SARS, and with coronavirus, the picture is still emerging, but at the moment it's sitting around 2%. That's across all ages. In reality, what we're seeing for people between the ages of 20 and 45 to 50, it's less than 1%.
Okay, so that in itself tells us a lot. Now, I have a couple of theories on why certain young people are contracting it, because obviously there was this, they were thinking that it was this disease that would only impact older people. And then you were hearing that, places were being put on lockdown or schools were being shut. And then young people were going out drinking and partying and staying up all night. And then shocked that their immune systems were shot and that they were contracting the disease. Absolutely. And it was 4 out of 10 ER cases were coronavirus ER cases were young people under the age of 25. So I think some of it has to do with that. So that actually is a nice segue into why we're here. Healthy people don't get sick, right? So what does it take to be healthy? Right? If you're going to build a wall around yourself, what are the bricks that you need? What are the foundations? And we touched on them lightly at the start about our version of that, which is DRESS, which is diet, rest, exercise, stress management, selective supplements. So if we want to take a little look into each of those, and Despina, I feel like this is probably your jam, where you can talk to us a little bit about diet and how useful that is in inoculating us and building our immune systems and our response. Whatever's at the end of our fork, we know that that's one of the most important modulators of our immune system. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Since we're dealing with inflammation here, as we usually deal with chronic disease, but even in this situation, it's the same thing. We really want to have a rich plant-based diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, as well as healthy fats, which are super important, and clean meats and fish, etc. So it's the type of anti-inflammatory diet that we talk about all the time, and making sure that we add the herbs that are also very beneficial, like thyme and oregano and rosemary, and every herb of choice that people have. Hopefully, maybe they have time now to build a little garden in their kitchen. So definitely anti-inflammatory. We have berries are super important, as well as cruciferous vegetables, and all vegetables that have tons of color, because we want those phytonutrients. So we want the beets, we want the orange, we want the yellows, everything that we can get in there. Just go to the supermarket and get whatever's available.
And if you can't go to the supermarket, just so you know, in our Facebook group, Angela, who also works with us, has shared a fantastic resource of online, like farm to table delivery shops that will bring you your vegetables. So places like Riverford or Dalesford Organics that will bring you your food. Mindful Chef is another great one that will deliver food to you that's fresh, organic, clean. Again, lots of lean meats, lots of anti-inflammatory. So Despina, can we jump back to anti-inflammatory foods? So foods that we should avoid. And I'll actually, I'm just gonna get my slides up here so you can start talking about them while I get them on the screen, yeah?
Sure. Again, it's very similar to what we always tell our clients to be wary of, and to make sure that inflammatory foods such as grains like gluten, wheat, and things like sugar, which really bring up inflammation, processed foods. So that's why we're always saying whole foods, the avocados, the fruits and vegetables that we talked about, as well as dairy, to try to avoid, as that creates mucus. Especially at this time, it's very important that we don't create any mucus in the body. And of course, I always tell friends that alcohol is like liquid cake. So we really, really want to be cautious around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading a lot about the effects of sugar. So when we're talking about inflammation, sugar is probably one of the most inflammatory foods around, because it depletes your immune system by 50% for up to 5 hours after you've consumed it. So, you know, the people who are piling up their supermarket carts with chocolate and crisps and junk food or processed foods that easily convert into sugar, those are the things that we need to really be avoiding at this point in time if we want to keep a robust and healthy immune system, regardless of if it's the coronavirus. Like even after, you know, beyond corona, we need to be thinking about staying healthy, because like Nathan said, you know, these viruses tend to show up in a big wave at, you know, for a little while, they kind of recede, and then we get another wave later on in the year. So just because in 6 weeks we might be out of the woods and we might start returning to normal, doesn't mean that we can revert to old habits, correct?
Absolutely. I think the whole purpose of social distancing and you know, having restricted movement of people achieves two things. Of course, it slows down the spread of the disease, but it gives everyone who is in isolation a time to actually start to build their immunological resilience for the point in time at which all these restrictions are relaxed. Because as you rightly said, Raven, when the restrictions are relaxed and we all start circulating again, coronavirus wouldn't have disappeared. It just means that we would have slowed the rate of spread down to a level where the health services are able to cope with and treat the most serious cases. So, you know, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever it ends up being, is an incredible opportunity to start building, to start prehabilitating your resilience and your immune resource. I just also, if I may, just like to touch on something Despina said. She made mention of all these anti-inflammatory foods. What the research shows us from both the SARS and the MERS pandemics is that the greatest and most reliable predictor of severe disease outcomes, and we can assume the same to hold true for coronavirus too, as it's a very similar virus and behaves in a very similar way. The most robust predictor for severe outcomes is systemic inflammation. And systemic inflammation affects, of course, the population asymmetrically. You can have people struggling with systemic inflammation in their teens, you know, young adults, the elderly, which is why, you know, people who are systemically inflamed and have these problems are at risk of contracting more severe forms of the disease. You know, and that is why younger people aren't spared from more severe outcomes. So, all the things that Despina has touched on are really, really powerful tools in helping to modulate and suppress systemic inflammation.
Fantastic. We've just got a question that came in here. It says, if someone has no symptoms, does that mean that the mortality rate might be lower? Actually, that's from Angela. Great question, Angela. Which one of you want to take that one? You want to take that? Despina, do you want to take? Nathan, you want to go for it? Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Epidemiology happens to be my thing, so I'm happy to take that one.
Great.
Angela, great question. In someone who is asymptomatic and has a confirmed case of the disease, now how you would establish that would be quite difficult to do, because anyone who's asymptomatic wouldn't be eligible for testing. But yeah, asymptomatic would class you in the least severe form of the illness, and the likelihood of mortality in that case is low to virtually non-existent. I hope that answers the question.
Angela, if you can give us a thumbs up if that answers your question, then we can move on. I'm just waiting to see if she puts anything in there. Nothing yet, but let's maybe start thinking about, yeah, go ahead, Nathan. You have something else to add?
Yeah, so I'm saying more acute and serious disease progression becomes apparent very early on. So generally, if someone becomes ill by day 2 or 3 of becoming ill, it would be very apparent that things are progressing along a more serious trajectory, and that medical intervention is required. If someone is asymptomatic and or has very mild symptoms, it's likely to remain that way for the duration of their illness over the course of 7 to 10 days. Also, just as we're talking about symptoms, one of the newest symptoms that are emerging, and maybe also something for people to look out for, is a persistent loss of smell and a persistent loss of or a persistent loss of taste. So in addition to the classic COVID symptoms that we're all aware of, loss of smell and taste are now have been established as being present in 30% of cases.
That's fascinating. I think I was reading somewhere that it was up to, I think about 30% of cases have got a loss of smell. So
that's correct.
That's correct. Yeah. So that's really interesting as well. Yeah. That there are different types of symptoms that are emerging. The symptom profile it's very variable. So that's something also for everyone to be mindful of as well. Not everyone's going to show up with headaches or digestive complaints, or because they're saying some people have got some of those things, but just to be really mindful and kind of vigilant about what you're and obviously I'm not being paranoid about it either. If after 14 or 24 days that you've been exposed. So by the way, this is one that has been kind of irking me a little bit, that the government guidelines are 14 days of quarantine or whatever, paying attention, self-isolating for 14 days. But we're seeing now that 24 days is probably more accurate, and that the virus can live on surfaces for up to 28 days. So to be mindful of that, and to use your antibacterial soaps, wipes, sprays, all those kinds of things. So we're getting more and more questions here right now. So Chanda, and I hope I'm saying your name right, is asking, is there any evidence of viral load, i.e. number of exposures increasing risk of symptomatic disease? Any daily supplements you would recommend if you have to work face-to-face as a key worker? Really awesome question.
Great question.
Yeah.
Awesome question.
Yeah, go for it, Nathan.
Chandan, excellent question. Firstly, when it comes to evidence, because we're dealing with sort of a novel threat here in terms of a novel virus, a lot of the evidence will become clear probably a year or two after all of this has passed. So the picture is very much one in evolution and one that's emerging. But of course, there's a lot of inferences we can make just from first principles. When it comes to any respiratory pathogen, and coronavirus in this instance, yes, your likelihood of contracting disease is very much linked to the viral load that you're exposed to. In Italy, for example, we've seen that 8% of the most severe forms of coronavirus have been in frontline healthcare workers who haven't been adequately protected. And we can only infer from that that that's because of the viral load that they're exposed to. You know, most people will probably be exposed to one or two, most people who contract the illness may be exposed to one or two people, you know, with coronavirus before they contract it, whereas for healthcare workers on the front line, it's a continuous exposure. So absolutely, viral load does come into it. Is there any evidence? No, but I think first principles are sufficient, you know, to make that inference. As far as supplements are concerned, I think we're going to get to that a little later. I'm a frontline healthcare worker, so I'll be happy to share kind of my toolkit of immune enhancing and supportive supplements that I take, in addition to all the healthy lifestyle and dietary measures that we've briefly touched on.
Yeah, so just to that point, actually, you know, supplements are not the only thing that you can do. Like we said, if you're building a wall of immunity, it needs to be a holistic wall. It needs to have lots of different bricks that go into that. So you need your diet to be clean. You need to be sleeping well. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, because we talked about foods that you should avoid, and nutrients that you basically need are the things that we're going to talk about now, because we're seeing that in the cases of coronavirus, particularly in Italy, you know, we're seeing that the patients who are succumbing are very low in vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, selenium, melatonin, which is why I was referencing sleep, and zinc. So I am going to turn back to Despina on that one, because I feel like that's definitely her jam. Like, if she's going to talk a little bit more about like the foods that we should be including. Obviously we talked about, you know, herbs like oregano, rosemary, thyme, but things like, you know, obviously prebiotics, probiotics, and I'm going to let her jump into that now.
Yeah, I think maybe it's best that we all talk about what we do individually, because I do believe that everyone is different. And as we've talked about before, Ray, sometimes doing our genetics and figuring out where our weak links are personally might be important. I know for myself, I have a VDR SNP for vitamin D. So even though most people, their GP say 1,000 IUs of vitamin D is good enough, really it's important, if we don't have the SNP information, to at least do the blood test and see where in the range is your vitamin D. I am definitely one that loves vitamin C, so I do take tons of it as I eat lots of fruits and vegetables. If people have access to IV, I think IV vitamin C is wonderful. In combination with vitamin C, I also take quercetin, being that allergy season is also coming up. For some people, that can create some type of mast cell inflammation. So quercetin is a great flavonoid that really, really helps balance your Th1, Th2 immunity, so that you have more killer cells to be able to attack viruses and bacteria as they come through. I also believe that people that have systemic inflammation, things like curcumin are really important, although it's great to actually cook with it. Sometimes taking something more medicinally and higher milligrams, etc., is imperative at this point. Green tea, ECGC that in green tea is super helpful, as well as other herbs like licorice. They all help the immune system. And with selenium, you know, eating your Brazil nuts, zinc is super important, even more important in male health overall. You need more zinc, so I would recommend that highly. So those are kind of my top ones that are on my shelf right now. I think, and probiotics, of course, and eating a lot of prebiotic fiber, so food with fiber, all the root vegetables, super important. And yeah, why doesn't everyone else also talk about what's important for them? And then people can kind of get an idea of other things that they are taking that maybe they can put on the side for now, like, you know, hair, skin, and nail supplements or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, Nathan, do you want to go for it and you want to talk about what you've been doing? Because obviously you are a frontline worker, you are out there and you've been exposed, so, and you're healthy, and yeah, so please tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident. I've been exposed countless times, and yeah, so far still standing and feeling great. as a frontline healthcare worker, my concern is less about, the potential for falling ill. It's, I guess, like everyone else too, it's a potential for developing, if I do fall ill, more severe forms of the disease. Now we know that what leads to severe disease outcomes and sometimes even mortality is uncontrolled oxidative stress, uncontrolled free radical damage. So one of the ways that the immune system tries to, in the initial stages, get rid of the virus itself or cells infected with viral particles is by releasing massive amounts of free radicals. And free radicals are very damaging to most organisms. Our body's tissues are, of course, equipped with antioxidants, which should help to buffer and make them more resilient against free radical damage. So for me, my supplementation regime feeds into ways that I can increase the antioxidant status of my tissues and my cells. So firstly, that would be, as Despina already said, a diet which is very rich in green leafy vegetables, deep colorful veg, phytonutrient-rich fruits like berries, etc. But as a next tier, vitamin C is probably at the top of that list for me. The levels of vitamin C in immune cells are about 50 to 100 times higher than the circulating levels in your blood. So your immune cells have a huge requirement for vitamin C. I like liposomal vitamin C, which is a type of vitamin C. But yeah, for me, sort of that is foundational. Next, I would say vitamin D3. And I usually take anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 international units a day. Now, how I know that that's what I require is, Des touched on this earlier, is I've actually done some genetic testing, which has helped me determine exactly what my vitamin D requirement is. I have the same genetic variation as Despina has, meaning that my vitamin D requirement is higher than normal. But we know that there's good evidence to show that vitamin D not only reduces the incidence or the frequency with which people contract respiratory infections, and COVID is a respiratory infection, but it also decreases the duration and severity of infection if you do contract it. Again, in addition to vitamin D3, I would say zinc plays a very important role. Zinc plays a dual role. It's both a potent antioxidant, but it also helps to block viral replication within cells. So we know that one of the way that coronavirus spreads in our tissues is it hijacks our cells machinery to make copies of itself, and zinc interferes with that process. So in addition to being a potent antioxidant, zinc also has some antiviral qualities. And then glutathione, which is the body's master antioxidant. Those are my four sort of foundational supplements.
Fantastic. So I agree with most of those. The one thing that I think that I throw in there that's probably a little bit different would be I take probiotics because I don't do dairy, so I don't consume my probiotics from yogurt. So I supplement with probiotics. I definitely supplement with liposomal vitamin C. That's one of my favorite things. And whenever I have ever come down with anything, let's say, usually when I'm traveling, it's usually if I've not got enough sleep, or, I've been on a plane for a very long period of time and breathing in that recirculated air. And I will go straight and get an IV, and that will sort it out. And the IV will be vitamin C, NAC, always. And NAC is the precursor to glutathione, which is the master antioxidant. And it's also a decongestant, and a bronchodilator. It's a bronchodilator. So that means it's really good for your lungs. And for people, I think Stephen's asking a question about, what can you do to mitigate risk, right? That would be one of those things that you could definitely do. Zinc, obviously, taking zinc lozenges when you're going out. Silver psyllin or colloidal silver Silvercillin is a brand of colloidal silver by a company called Designs for Health, whose supplements that we stock. And unfortunately, it's out of stock in the UK. So colloidal silver on its own should probably do the trick. Spraying it at the back of your throat, spraying it, swabbing it into your nose, because we know that the virus can enter through, obviously through your nasal passages and through your mouth. Increasing secretory IgA, so immunoglobulins, are an important part of this as well. So boosting your immune system by boosting your immunoglobulin intake is going to be really important, which is why gut health is so important. And that's why, getting probiotics in, eating anti-inflammatory foods, consuming things like beta glucans. You can find those in oats. So that's your soluble fiber as well. Oats are a good place to get that. Gluten-free, of course, please. Let me be clear. Gluten-free oats, always gluten-free, okay? Because gluten is highly inflammatory, so we don't want to be creating that inflammation response at all, if we can avoid it. So gluten-free oats and the beta glucans. Eggs, believe it or not, once they're cage-free and pasture-raised and free range, then they are also, egg yolks are a really great source of vitamin D and also immunoglobulins. So eating well, having a lot of good protein, good clean protein, minimizing your starchy carbohydrates, supplementing with zinc. Like I said, my lozenges are something that I would never leave home without. My oil of oregano, that's like my secret weapon. That actually cured me of strep throat right before I had to go on a cruise a year ago. I came down with strep throat like 2 days before I was due to travel. And I just kind of caned it with apple cider vinegar, oil of oregano, and I think probably up to about 8,000 milligrams of 8,000 milligrams of liposomal vitamin C. I was taking 2,000 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours, which is a lot, because if you took like a normal version of vitamin C, it would create some gastric disturbance. Like you would have, I probably would have pooped most of it out. Sorry to be so graphic. However, the liposomal version does not do that to you. It does not irritate your gut in that way. So, which is why we opt for the liposomal version. And if in the absence of that, if you can find an IV close to home, there's some places in London that are doing IVs that they'll come to you. Nathan generally offers them, but I think right now the clinic that he works out of is shut, so it's not happening at this point. But when we do get back on the road to, when things start opening up again, that's a great way to top up your immune system. To go for an IV once every couple of weeks and make sure that you've got a nice good dose of vitamin C and NAC and glutathione in there. I think Myers cocktails are a pretty safe bet, like in terms of immunity and building immunity, right, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're a good fit for most people.
Yeah, and so in terms of like general maintenance, they're a good fit. But as we were talking about, certain genetic SNPs. So Despina touched on that, and Nathan touched on it as well. Like we've all had our genetics tested, so we know. And same like the two of them, I have issues with vitamin D absorption. So the levels that would be recommended by the government wouldn't work for me. I would have to go significantly higher because I've got genetic variances that make.
Can I just say right on that point, the recommended amount of vitamin D by the government, as you referenced, is the level required to prevent rickets in people. Now, I don't know how many people you've seen walking around with rickets. I haven't seen any in 18 years of practicing medicine. So that really is the lower amount required to prevent your bones from bowing. It's nothing. Yeah. If you want an immune boosting and a life enhancing, resilience enhancing effect from vitamin D3, you need to be, multiple times above what the recommended daily, allowance of vitamin D is.
But that's why you should work with a practitioner who can figure that out for you, because we don't want you doing anything unsafe either. Okay. So Helen is asking, what is a Myers cocktail? Nathan, that one's definitely yours.
Yeah. Helen, a Myers cocktail is a form of intravenous vitamin and mineral therapy. It's named after a US physician from Baltimore, John Myers, who started using intravenous vitamins and minerals to treat a host of illnesses, immune compromised conditions, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, allergies, a whole host of things. But it contains a high dose of vitamin C. It's well tolerated by most people, which is why it's so well known. And for most people who want to start or want to try out an IV drip or a vitamin drip, a Myers cocktail is usually the first thing that I recommend for most people.
That's great. I'm glad that we got to answer that, because I realize that we might be living in a little bit of a vacuum where we do all of these things and some people don't know what they are. So thank you for asking that question, Helen. David asks, what are your thoughts going forward in the future on wearing face masks to protect yourself in crowded areas like they are in China to reduce the chance of getting the virus? Great question, David. I personally am a big fan of face masks. I know Nathan's going to say the same thing. Despina, I don't know how you feel about it, but just because we know that, yeah, definitely. We know that the virus can enter through your nasal passages. So why wouldn't you wear something to stop you from, from allowing the virus to enter into, because your first line of defense is going to be your skin, right? That's the first layer of defense, right? So if you can, which is why hand washing is so important. But obviously it's not just your hands that you need to worry about. You need to worry about your orifices, your cavities, your eyes, your nose, your mouth. Those are the things that you need to be mindful of. So wearing a face mask, I got mine today. It showed up 2 days late, but it finally arrived today. So I was really excited about it. I'll give you guys the website where I got this from. It's not crazy expensive. It's an N95 mask, which is a surgical, what they, Nathan, you can confirm that this is what they use in hospitals.
So it's, the N95 mask or FFP2 is the threshold in Europe. That is the mask that is rated to actually block out viral particles. So, you won't be able to inhale viral particles. So the fibers of the mask are actually small enough to prevent inhalation of viral particles. I see a lot of people walking around with just normal surgical face masks, that aren't, N95 masks. And the question I'm often asked is, do those confer any protection? And the answer is yes and no, as it is with most things. No, in the sense that, if it's not sufficient to actually prevent you from inhaling viral particles, but most people will be exposed to virus in aerosolized forms. That means virus that's suspended in little droplets that are expelled when people cough and sneeze. It's estimated that we expel about 20,000 droplets of respiratory secretion when we cough and sneeze.
Oh, that's gross. So gross.
It's the gross reality.
Oh.
But from my opinion, even though a normal surgical mask, if you can't get an FFP2 mask, should protect you, or at least confer a small degree of protection to the amount of aerosolized saliva particles that you're being exposed to. The other thing I think that all masks do very effectively is they make you more aware of your T-zone, your mouth, nose, and essentially this area of your face. They make you more aware of that. So irrespective of what type of mask you're wearing, you're less likely to directly touch those parts of your face, and inoculate yourself or infect yourself that way, irrespective of the type of mask you're wearing, N95 or not.
Also, Nathan, they were saying that when you are wearing the mask, it makes people aware as a reminder not to get too close to you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
in a way,
it's a very a visual aid.
It sort of reinforces that social distancing. Yeah, absolutely.
Someone was asking, I think this is a good question. With the current worldwide shortage of N95 masks, is it really necessary for everyone to wear a mask? Thanks, Aidan. Good question. Is it necessary if we're social distancing?
So that's a great question. I think one of the reasons that that there was messaging against people going out and getting masks en masse was because it was creating acute shortages and sourcing shortages, meaning that health professionals working on the front line were not adequately protected. But that's we just need to make a distinction between the question. The question was, would a mask confer protection? And the answer, I think, there's a consensus of opinion here that it would. A different question is, should everyone therefore go out and buy masks? You know, should that be your priority? No, probably not. I still think, you know, the first lines of defense are still, you know, social distancing and adequate hand hygiene. And if you are by the means of sourcing a mask, absolutely do so. But that is not priority number one. And I think that was something we were acutely aware of in the early stages because we wanted to avoid acute shortages of masks in the country.
Well, thank you for that. Marco is asking, what is one of the best supplements to get started with that he can purchase easily at the moment? I'm going to answer that one because I manage our supplement shop. We have got a product called BioRevive Beta Immune. It contains beta glucan, which, like I was saying before, is an immunoglobulin. So it boosts immunity. It's got vitamin D3 and it also has zinc in there. So that would be a good place to start. Obviously keeping on hand lots and lots of liposomal vitamin C. I shared the link. So most of the people who have joined this call, if you've registered via, you know, the Facts Over Fear webpage, you should have received the toolkit, the Supercharge Your Immunity toolkit. I put links to all of the supplements that we recommend in there. So that would be the one that I would say, if you're going to get going with, you know, go with that and definitely get some vitamin C to go along with it, because then you'd be covered with C, D, and zinc. The one thing that I don't want us to get too hung up on supplements though, because they are important. Thank you, Heather. Thanks so much for your feedback. She says the toolkit's wonderful. But I don't want us to get too hung up on that. I want us to talk about melatonin, because that's one of the other things that we've seen is depleted in the patients with coronavirus. And that's why older people are more impacted, because their melatonin reserves are lower than younger people, right? So melatonin is your sleep hormone, and it is an antioxidant as well. It's responsible for all sorts of wonderful things. Boosting immunity is one of them, and which is why it's so important that we get good quality sleep. Now, obviously, we need to get good quality sleep for a number of reasons, but in this particular case, we really need to be making sure that we were getting into bed at a decent time, you know, by 10 p.m., so that we're capitalizing on that, those golden 4 hours, the 10 to 2, which is when melatonin is being produced at its highest. And if you're awake during that time, or if you're doing things that can compete with melatonin, such as, let's say, exercising too hard late in the day, having lights on, overhead lights on very late in the evening, making it hard for the body to wind down, and keeping cortisol elevated, because cortisol will directly compete with melatonin. We want you to be thinking about creating some really nice sleep rituals so that you can get very good, deep, restorative sleep, and start tracking your sleep if you don't know if you're getting deep. Obviously, you will know if you're getting deep restorative sleep or not, because you should be waking up. If you're getting good quality sleep, you should be waking up feeling full of beans. If you are waking up tired and groggy and unhappy, you're probably not getting good sleep. So tracking it would be important, but also just noting how you feel. If you've got a sleep tracker, that's great, or some kind of activity or fitness tracker, Fitbits, Oura Rings. I'm wearing my Oura Ring. I think Nathan's got his. Just being we're all big fans of Oura Ring over here. We're part of the Fellowship of the Ring. But in the absence of having a sleep tracker, you know, just pay attention to how you feel, right? Because how you feel is probably going to be one of the biggest indicators. And some people like to tell me, oh, I can live off of 5 hours sleep. And, you know, I worked in banking for a long time, in investment banking, where they did live off of 5 hours sleep. And they used to wear it like a badge of honor, like, I can survive on 5 hours. Like, I'm like, you're stupid. You're going to kill yourself, because it's causing your blood pressure to spike, your blood sugar to go up, you know, a whole host of your mood to be unstable, your waistline to expand, because when you don't get enough sleep and you're tired, you reach for lots of stimulants like sugar, so starchy carbohydrates, pizzas, donuts, sweets, cakes, cookies, white rice, white pasta, you know, all the things that we should be avoiding. All your favorite food groups.
Yeah, exactly. I think just to the point you're making, you can survive on 5 hours, but you can't thrive on 5 hours.
Yeah, you can survive. So, and for how long is the other thing too, because you are shortening your life. That's the other thing. So you will survive, but not for very long. So if you want to live a nice, long, healthy, happy life, and you want to be robust and resilient against invaders and threats and chronic illness, sleep is probably, well, I think it is. It's the biggest component.
if I may, I think melatonin is only very recently in the medical literature emerging as, you know, a substance that goes beyond just sleep regulation. You know, conventionally, we thought of melatonin only as a sleep regulator, as a regulator of circadian rhythm. But we know now that melatonin 1 is a very potent antioxidant, and you touched on that. But secondary to that is the fact that melatonin actually modulates how efficiently your immune system or different parts of your immune system signal to each other. So we know that we have different arms of our immune system which are specialized to deal with different threats, and you need to be able to pivot very efficiently, from one mode of immune functioning to another. And having sufficient melatonin is key in being able to regulate and modulate that pivot.
Great way to
and
respond
also,
to that.
Ray,
Thank you. Go on.
also,
Yes.
Ray, I know you're saying that the amount of sleep is important, but it really is the quality. As you know, I'm a diehard bulletproofer, as that's where I did my coaching. And Dave Asprey doesn't sleep necessarily 8 hours, but he makes sure he gets enough deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep. So tracking is super important. And another point I want to bring up, and a reason why maybe some of these younger people are getting affected by this, is there seems to be a lot more sleep apnea than people know. So that is something to check. I sleep alone, so I need my tracking to be able to know how I'm sleeping. But if others sleep with someone, to see how are they breathing? Are they waking up in the middle of the night? What's going on there? So really understanding the quality of your sleep is super important.
I totally agree. I think so to your point about Dave Asprey, he actually recommends, and he's cited a few studies where the optimal number of hours of sleep would be 6.5, but where at least 40% of that is spent in deep sleep. So that's pretty important. Being able to track the quality of your sleep is important. Knowing that you're getting quality over quantity is important as well. If you do struggle with that, we have a course. I'm a hypnotherapist. Well, I started off as a hypnotherapist and then moved into functional medicine, and now I integrate the two and created a course around it. So if sleep has been something that has been problematic for you, then please get in touch, because we can definitely help with that. Chandan asks a really good question around what is the difference between liposomal vitamin C versus things like Berocca, and then what is the DNA testing that you did, Nathan? So that's two questions for the price of one. The difference between Berocca, which is, I guess, a supermarket brand, I'm thinking.
Yeah. So Berocca is an effervescent multivitamin supplement. So it contains a little bit of vitamin C and little bits of a whole host of other things. In terms of the difference between Berocca or conventional vitamin C supplements and liposomal vitamin C is water soluble, meaning that in order for you to be able to absorb vitamin C from the intestinal tract or your gut and to get it into your bloodstream, it needs to be actively transported by a transporter molecule across your gut wall. Now, that whole process is rate limited. You can only transport so much vitamin C at any given time. So, for example, if you took 1,000 milligrams of Berocca or whatever conventional supplement you were taking, because that rate of absorption is rate limited, you'd only end up absorbing, let's say, maybe between 10 and 15% of the amount that you were taking. What liposomal forms of vitamin C does is it essentially bypasses the active transport or absorption of vitamin C from the gut, meaning that it makes vitamin C, it packages water-soluble vitamin C in a fat-soluble carrier, meaning that you're able to bypass the enzyme that would normally absorb vitamin C, and you're able to absorb the entire payload. Meaning if you take a whole gram of liposomal vitamin C, the whole gram makes it into your bloodstream. So even though it's slightly more expensive, you end up getting a lot more bang for your buck that way. Something that Ray also touched on earlier is when we look at using vitamin C supplementation for antiviral properties, you need doses much higher than a gram. If you take conventional vitamin C in high doses, you will end up getting some form of intestinal or gastric discomfort, usually diarrhea, whereas liposomal vitamin C in high doses is well tolerated.
I hope that answers your question. So that was question one. And I think she asked about the DNA testing that, well, we've all done DNA testing because we're all biohackers at heart, so we want to know how to optimize our lives. And I think we've all done different things. So I did 23andMe a few years ago, I think in 2017, and then translated the data with LifeCode Genetics, which is the company that we use now to do genetics testing for clients with. Nathan, who did you use?
I used 23andMe initially first, and then moved on to DNAfit after that. And more recently, we're doing a lot more work with LifeCode.
Mm-hmm. Despina?
Yeah, I did 23andMe as well. And I use a report through Pure Encapsulations, Pure Genomics. That is very helpful in understanding what's going on with the SNPs. So there's always many different options.
Yeah, there are tons of options. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, just to answer the question, the purpose or the utility of doing SNP testing, SNPs are genetic variations, which we all have, which can impact the way in which we utilize nutrients. So for example, we touched on a vitamin D SNP earlier. I have a SNP that confers lower sensitivity to vitamin D, meaning that I can't just supplement with conventional amounts if I want a given effect. I probably need to take amounts in excess of that. So it just helps you get a personalized and a much more targeted approach to your own needs as far as your nutritional and vitamin and mineral requirements are concerned.
So just for everyone who's curious what SNP means, it stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. So it just means genetic variance, right? Or variation. It's just a fancy word for, or fancy term or abbreviation for genetic variations, right? So we get our genetics tested because we want to make sure that there's nothing that's getting in the way of us being as healthy as we can, and making sure that we can absorb nutrients and vitamins in their best forms, because there are certain people who, and I think I actually am one of them, where vitamin B in the traditional form doesn't work for me. I have to get a different version of it, a methylated version of vitamin B. And some people might notice that, their nutrient needs are different because they've got different SNPs or different variations in their genetics. Now, we don't treat SNPs, we treat you as a whole, but the SNPs they kind of give us a big picture outlook on your health and your and being predictive as well, in what we have to look out for later on in life. And what we can do to be proactive around it as well, because 95% of your of chronic diseases are lifestyle related, so they're not all down to genetics. There's a lot that you can do to turn some of those problem genes off. Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes. Funnily enough, this hour has flown by.
It has flown by.
It has really flown by, and I'm thinking, like, what are sort of like the key takeaways that we want people to think about?
Stress management.
So we should talk about that. And in fact, if everybody wants to kind of get centered, because I was looking at Joe Dispenza today, he had a wonderful video where he was saying that one of the easiest ways to reduce the stress response, it's not just through meditation, it's a specific type of meditation. So breathing, obviously, the breath is very important. And that's what I teach people in hypnosis, where you learn how to breathe and you use pranayamic yogic breathing to do that. So you start off by doing 3 rounds. But the other thing that we want to do is, while we're practicing that type of breathing and slowing our breathing down and directing it downward into our bellies and using our diaphragms to breathe, it's to focus on the things that bring us joy, the things that we love, the people that we love. And if we can connect with that while we're in that deep, relaxed, meditative state, it actually turns down the inflammatory response in the body. It turns down that upregulated, that cortisol response as well. And then what it does is it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So it activates the healing system of the body. So that's what the parasympathetic nervous system is. It's basically the rest and digest. So I think it'd be really very useful for us if we could just practice a few moments, even if it's 60 seconds of us just kind of like reconnecting. So closing our eyes before we go, because I always think this is a nice way to wrap things up and for us to go off to bed and turn our lights down and start prepping our bodies for deep restorative sleep. So close your eyes, make yourselves comfortable, get comfortable. And I want you to put your right hand on your heart and your left hand on your belly. And just connect with the breath as it is, and closing your eyes and noticing where the breath is in the body. And probably noticing your heart rate. Mine's a little bit elevated because I've been talking a lot. And I'm excited about sharing all of this information with you to help you get your lives and your health on track. But I want you to just get centered and start thinking about directing the breath all the way down into that left hand on your tummy. And as you breathe in, I want you to think about breathing in love, breathing in health, breathing in vitality. Think about the people in your life that you love, that you can connect with, that you're grateful for. Gratitude is a fast track to bringing back the body and the mind into coherence. It's one of my favorite ways to get in tune and back in alignment and reducing stress. And if you like, you can start breathing in for a count of 4 and holding for a count of 5, and then making the out breath longer than the in breath. So you can think about releasing for a count of 7. And if you like, I can count for you. So I'm going to start now, beginning now, breathing in for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4. And holding for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And releasing for a count of 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just notice where the breath is now. Notice how your body's feeling. Notice if your shoulders are starting to soften. Notice if your jaw is starting to soften. By loosening your jaw, it sends an instant response to the body to relax. So the body can relax quickly and easily and turn on that healing system. Now, that was only a couple of seconds, maybe about 60 seconds, but if you can do that for 10 minutes, a couple times a day, Joe Dispenza was saying that if you do that 10 minutes 3 times a day, it gets the body into that healing state so that it never gets into that ramped up, overstressed state, that cortisol response. So I feel like that's something really practical that we can all do because the breathing is free. We can all sit on our sofas and practice it. We can do it in bed, and we can just stop for a moment. And I feel like the message from this virus, if we're talking about changing the narrative, it's asking us to pay attention to, the home that we've been given to live in, our bodies, and also the earth. But that's a whole other conversation I'm not going to go into. But I think our bodies for now should be our focus on how to make them strong, how to make them robust, how to make them resilient, and to just be able to tune in to what they're telling us, and start paying attention to what we put in. And that's not just food, okay? And not just supplements. The thoughts that we're thinking, those are things that are important as well. How we nourish ourselves from a spiritual perspective as well as a physical perspective. David, thank you for joining. Please reach out. You've got our contact details. So if you want to get more information, I saw you were asking some questions about the genetic testing. It is on our website, but if you can't find it, reach out and I'll direct you to it, okay? Does anyone have any closing questions or words? Nathan, Despina, anything to say?
I'd just like to remind everyone out there that we can be more than just fearful survivors. We've been equipped with wonderful and biologically complex bodies and immune systems that have been designed to support us through challenging periods like this. And all you have to do in return is just arm yourself and equip yourself with what your body needs and what your immune system needs to ensure that you're functioning at an optimal level. I hope you all found this very useful. I certainly enjoyed my time. Thank you very much for hosting, Ray. Thank you very much, Despina.
Thank you for joining, and thank you to everyone. Despina, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to remind everybody in this time that can be very difficult to remember to laugh and be in touch with people that you love and find ways to use your creativity, whether that's new cooking, new dance moves, just really
Absolutely.
find some fun and some play in it all.
So important. And on that note, actually, I'll be sharing stuff in the Facebook group pretty much every day on around recipes, around dance moves, around fitness. I'm starting to curate a bunch of resources and other practitioners, you know, drawing on all the people who are so generously giving of their time. I did a workout today at 3 p.m. With a friend of mine in Trinidad who is an instructor, a fitness instructor, and there are about 30 people on this Zoom call, and we were all jumping up and down like lunatics. But it felt so good to not be isolated, to just be able to laugh, to move, to sweat. Felt great. So we are going to stay connected in spite of the fact that we are physically distant. We can still stay connected. So I urge all of you, if you want to actually stay connected with us, please join the Facebook group. We're going to be doing more in there. We're going to be sharing with you. And yes, Aiden, definitely. I think we will definitely be doing more like these in the future. We tend to do this just in the Facebook group normally on a Tuesday night, but we decided to open it up to people who are not part of the group so we can invite them to be part of it as well so they can benefit from that. So I want to thank my panelists and my wonderful team. So grateful for you.
And we for you.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, everyone stay safe, stay well. And if there's anything we can do, we are here to help. Bye for now.